Hello, everyone. We're excited to have you here today for our program on predictive analytics in recruiting. My name is Lisa Panarello. I'm the founder of Careers Advance, and I'm on the board of SMA, the only chapter of SHRM dedicated to staffing and recruiting. Now, before we get started, we're very honored here to introduce our president, Mike Vore, who's going to share a few words. So, Mike.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Really excited to have everybody on today. Really want to thank our speakers at Modern Hire for taking time out to prepare and deliver this presentation along with Lisa. As Lisa mentioned, we are a SHRM chapter dedicated to staffing and recruiting. We're doing our best to put out content that is relevant for folks in those industries. And coming up, we have our November 4th Unconscious Bias webinar. As well as December 9th, we're having our typical holiday networking event, which will be a good opportunity for us all to get together and share about how amazing this year has been for everybody, and talk about some of the best practices we've used to kind of cope and get ahead of things. So again, really appreciate all your attendance. If anybody on the call is interested in joining the SMA, it is free for SHRM members, and you can reach out to Megan Scaramia, our membership director.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Well, we're going to have a robust conversation today with our guest speakers around powerful AI tools in recruiting. And throughout our chat, if you've got a thought or a question, throw it in the chat box. We'll pepper it in throughout our call where it's relevant, and we'll certainly open it up to more Q&A at the end. And to let you know, this is being recorded, and that is going to be made available to all of you next week on SMA's website for future reference and for sharing. All right. All right, so let's get this party started and introduce our experts. First up, Dana Bird. She's the Director of Assessment and Selection at Prudential Financial. She's our user expert today. She's responsible for enterprise-wide assessment strategy, and she drives rigor, consistency, and simplicity into their talent processes. Prior, Dana spent 20 years as an external consultant, supporting clients in individual, team, and organizational assessment and development initiatives. And she's been helping them connect the dots between business strategy, data, and people. Dana is an ICF certified coach and holds a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology from Virginia Tech. Welcome. Great to have you, Dana. Next up, Scott Goodman. Scott has more than 25 years of selection experience. He's currently the Executive Vice President of Professional Services at Modern Hire and leads a team responsible for developing, tailoring, validating, and calibrating assessments to ensure not only a great candidate experience, but measurable ROI. And previously, Scott founded and served as EVP of Operations at Shaker International and was the Managing Director of North American Consulting for CEB and SHL. Scott holds a master's and a PhD in Industrial and Organizational Psychology from the University of Akron. Welcome, Scott. And last but certainly not least, Dan Koletsky. He's a Managing Associate at Modern Hire and consults clients on deploying and maintaining evidence-based multi-method selection tools that drive performance. Prior, Dan was the manager of talent selection and assessment at Sears Holding Corp., where he held high visibility projects that he led across the enterprise. Dan's background also includes staffing and corporate recruiting, giving him a unique perspective on the full hiring cycle. He holds a master's in industrial organizational psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology and a BS degree in psychology from Penn State. Wow, that is an incredible amount of intelligence and experience that we have at our fingertips today. So let's jump in here with our first question. So I'm going to stop my share here right now. And Dan, I believe you have a nice slideshow that you can kind of kick up here.
I do, and I will pull that up now.
Excellent. Thanks. Well, we're actually going to kick this first question to Dana. So Dana, you are the end user here and a client of Modern Hire. So can you share with us, in your perspective, why some recruiters and TAs use pre-hire assessments and really balance that perspective at what challenges that can be expected when they're using them?
Sure. Thanks. This is very a topic very near and dear to my heart. I spend a lot of time day to day working with the recruiters and relationship managers on this very topic. And I mean, I think ultimately the business case for using these assessments is that they generate ROI. You know, they're fast and efficient. You know, a digital on-demand assessment is going to be faster than you know, recruiters who would otherwise have to be screening high volumes of applicants on their own. So it reduces the burden on talent acquisition, which in turn ensures that we're directing our finite resources to those applicants who have a greater likelihood of being successful if they're hired. We know that well-validated assessments help us therefore prioritize applicants who are more likely to stay and who are more likely to be successful in the role. And we can speak to some more evidence around these 2 points as we continue. But of course, we also know that these science-backed selection methodologies are, you know, guided by the uniform guidelines, other codes of ethics, which we'll explore a little bit more in detail. They create a more fair and consistent process for candidates. Often a well-validated assessment like we're discussing is replacing something that is more unsystematic, a screening approach that is generally going to be less predictive and has the potential to introduce bias. But of course, a well-designed pre-hire assessment can do even more, and particularly one of the reasons that we partner with our friends at Modern Hire is that the way that they have designed their assessments is that it doesn't just give us an opportunity to showcase Prudential's brand, but also gives candidates not only an engaging experience, but an experience that makes them feel like they have the opportunity to showcase what they are bringing to the table. So from our perspective at Prudential, we want everyone to know that Prudential is an amazing place to work, but we also want candidates to understand how they would fit with Prudential, but also could contribute to our company as we continue to evolve.
You know, I'm actually really fascinated by these assessments because it's really using technology to make the process more human. It's fascinating to me on how we can have a better candidate experience and also a more effective hire that's going to fit the role, going to fit the cultural organization by using technology to sort of assess the candidate. So it's pretty great place to start. So thanks for that, Dana.
Lisa, I think you make a great point about the assessments are, you know, high tech and science based, but we can design them in a way that makes them human and have a positive and engaging experience. I think there is a misconception, I would argue, that candidates don't like tests. And one of the areas of pushback we can receive is that everyone is very focused on, you know, candidate experience, right? It's very front of mind for everybody. However, I mean, it's absolutely possible to design an experience for candidates that not only is not necessarily replacing a human experience, but is giving them the opportunity to feel like they are gaining knowledge, that they are sharing something about themselves, and is a very positive experience. It is a high touch experience, even though it is, to your point, it's scientific and, you know, technically sound.
Yeah. I think I'm one of the few people that likes assessments. To me, it says that the organization is really looking for the great fit, not perfect, but the greatest fit that they can. It's going to fit the whole variety of the company's work environment, the culture, the operations, as well as the functional role. I mean, why step into something that you're going to want to leave in a few months? So that's just me.
Well, and you know, I've drunk the Kool-Aid as well. I'm obviously a big proponent of assessments, but there are people across the organization who are more skeptical and need a little bit more conversation around, you know, basically the underpinnings of the assessment. What are the benefits and advantages of it? What is it going to look like for them? And this change management is a crucial part of rolling out any new assessment. I think, you know, it would be really nice if it were as easy as working with like delightful partners like Scott and Dan here to design and validate an assessment and press go. But obviously, it involves a lot more of, you know, education and championing the assessment, not just with, you know, other members of HR, but also across the businesses. Even with a compelling business case, you know, some people are resistant to feeling like they're having decision-making power taken from them. So being able to understand first the different concerns that people may have and being able to respond to them is really crucial. Whether that's speaking to the scientific underpinnings of the assessments or really, I mean, I think in some instances, there's an emotional impact of needing to let go and needing to trust, and understanding what those concerns are and being able to address them sometimes in an ongoing fashion is really key to making adoption seamless and make it a positive experience for everyone.
Great. Well, in terms of the positive experience really leading to the particular assessment option, I understand that the virtual job tryout is a predictive modeling used to assess a candidate's job-related performance and behavior. So the scientific background on that, I guess my three cents knowledge on that. So Scott, can you help us understand how the virtual job tryout is implemented and if there's sort of specific job types that it works best for?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. So you said something that was, I think, really pertinent a few minutes ago, that, we're using technology to make hiring more personal, and that's really what Modern Hire's approach is all about. Our name for the assessment is a virtual job tryout, and it's a very intentional name. It's a day in the life experience where we are putting candidates in the role, albeit virtually, and letting them test drive the job, so to speak, and they engage in a range of simulated job tasks and job relevant exercises. So as they go through it, the personal part is they're getting to learn about the job, the company, while the companies get to learn about them. So they're getting this employment brand message. At the same time, the end users are getting relevant, meaningful, scorable information that allows them to rank candidates based on abilities. And it's pretty much industry agnostic. So we work across a wide variety of industries: retail, energy, financial, healthcare, et cetera. And the sweet spot really in terms of what type of jobs is two broad buckets: high volume and high impact. So the VJT is really applicable to various entry-level jobs: hourly retail, distribution center, call center. Those are the high volume hires. And then also high impact. So think leadership positions, first line leader, store manager that may be managing a significant book of business, those types of things.
So just curious, yeah, great. I wanted to see this piece. So how does it work? I'm just curious, like, do recruiters and TAs have a chance to say, if they're working with you as a partner, to take a test drive, to kind of work through it themselves and see how the functional aspects of it before they implement it for their hirings?
Yeah, so I guess, leading up to it, there's lots of discussion to kind of build out what the solution should look like for what jobs. And really, I think the question you're asking is, where in the workflow, in the hiring workflow, does the VJT, does the assessment fit? And this is just an illustrative example to kind of speak to that. So we use the term blueprints within Modern Hire, and that's really our way to define an ideal hiring workflow for a given job. And it's a lot of conversation, as you alluded to. So this is a good illustrative example of how that process plays out. So it's not uncommon to start with some screening questions that are delivered through the Modern Hire platform. We can have like an on-demand text, ask some of those basic qualification questions, legal right to work, can you work these hours, et cetera. And then the next step in the workflow is really what gives candidates the opportunity to learn more about the job through a realistic job preview and that engaging assessment experience that we call the VJT, virtual job tryout, where they get to try it out. And then the rest of the blueprint may cover various interview stages. It could be on demand, asynchronous or live. We're leveraging job-related questions and behavioral-based rating scales for the interviewer to use and review and further evaluate candidates beyond what the assessment tells us. And then the candidate can also use our self-scheduling for live interviews, and that workflow automation is really what the end users, recruiters, and hiring managers use to fast-track candidates based upon their assessment and interview scores.
What's the duration of the job? I'm sorry, excuse me, the duration of the job tryout assessment piece, like that second column there, the assessment, like how many questions they're answering, and what's sort of the typical, I know it's different for everyone, duration of that particular assessment?
Yeah, it varies. So not to be intentionally vague, but typical would be 30 minutes to maybe 60 minutes. So for hourly type jobs, it's more like 30 minutes. For managerial, we may be pushing closer to an hour. And keep in mind, like, that process isn't just question answer. That's the whole experience, right? There's messaging to the candidate in there. There's opportunity to learn about the role throughout. There's opportunity at the end to provide feedback on the experience. So that 30 to 60 minute is everything. It's not 30 minutes of just quote unquote test taking. And there's folks on our team who have done a lot of analytics to look at opt-out, because that's an important consideration. Are we losing candidates, right? A lot of folks will think like, oh, we're putting something in front of candidates and our best ones are going to say, thanks, I don't want to play that game. But really what we find out is most of the opt-out occurs in the first few minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. You know, the candidate either comes to the conclusion, this is not the right opportunity for me, or the kind of self-acknowledgement, I don't think I'm doing very well at this, and this probably isn't going to end that great for me, so I will opt out. It's pretty atypical to get somebody who's 20, 30 minutes in and then says, I'm opting out. Usually it's early on in the process.
Wow.
This is Dana, and I would just echo that and say that we're using a customer service assessment that Modern Hire has developed and validated for Credential for entry-level call center applicants, and it takes about 45 minutes. And to my knowledge, in our applicant pool, we don't see a lot of drop-off, and it definitely get positive candidate reactions from the experience.
And as far as, you know, how we implement the assessment, I guess, Dan, if you can jump to the next slide, there's a few options, and I'll hit these pretty quickly in terms of actually deploying the assessment. Most of our clients, most companies opt for tailoring a pre-configured solution. So what I mean by that is they start with an assessment that's based on years of research and the science of what makes new hires successful in a specific job or job family. So we're rarely starting with a blank slate. And then we tailor the solution by adding company branding and messaging and other aspects that might be unique to the organization. So that's kind of the first most common way of implementing VJT. Other companies will partner with us to really create more of a ground up. So create scenarios and assessment measures that really reflect unique situations or unique skills that are encountered on the job, and that's an option as well. And this notion of modular is pretty handy if you have candidates that will apply simultaneously to a variety of similar positions within your company. So let's just use call center as an example. I may apply to be a billing call center agent and a customer, retention call center agent because I just want the job and call center is my thing and I like your company. Rather than take 2 30-minute assessments, so to speak, the first assessment I take, you get the full meal deal, here's the 30-minute assessment. And if I go and apply for another job, then we're dynamically serving up what's the unique content for that second job. So billing was the first, customer retention is the second. It's not another 30-minute experience. It might be 5, 7, 8 minutes where we're reusing the data collected at round 1 and just layering on what's the unique aspects of that role that we need to measure at the second assessment.
If I can just say, I want to remind folks on this call 2 things. One, this is being recorded. So if any of you joined a little late, we'll be able to send this out to you all on SMA's website so you can catch anything you missed or go back to really re-listen to this meaty information. And secondly, feel free to jot it down in the chat box, a question, a thought that you have, because we can absolutely address as many as we can throughout this and make it really relevant to you. Everyone on this call has your own pain points and your own goals as a recruiter, as a staffing agent, as a TA specialist. So, hit us with questions about how this particular tool and any of the information that you're getting here from our experts can help you. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And Dan, we'll just hit one more slide. I want to just speak to this for like 10 seconds because I know we have a lot to cover. So, earlier I mentioned the VJT is applicable to a number of industry verticals and roles, and this is a little hard to see, but this is our existing library of solutions bucketed into different verticals or different roles, whether it's call center, professional, retail, and that library is growing every day. So I'll move on from here. You'll have this in the slides. And kick this over to Lisa for the next question.
Well, I'm excited, by the way, just to see how many different industries are leveraging pre-hire assessments, that it's really can run the gamut and can benefit all these industries. So that's exciting news. Well, Dan, we certainly want to get you in the picture here. Excuse me. So can you shed some light on results? What is the performance prediction before and after using the assessments? And, how can they generate real gains in recruiting?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and thanks everyone for joining today. Pleasure to be on. There's really a number of reasons, that many of which we've already discussed, as to why different organizations would choose to use pre-hire assessments. We talked about the efficiency gains, the effectiveness. They're fair. They can be an unbiased approach to selection, and you also have an opportunity to really create a wow experience for your candidates. What we wanted to share were just a few real world examples to highlight some of the gains in recruitment that our clients have seen by using pre-hire assessment tools. And when we think about, showing this, ROI, so to speak, of using pre-hire assessments, we typically focus on three main areas. You're going to really be looking at, what's the gains in your administrative efficiency? How many people can you get through the process, and how quickly can you do that? Any performance lifts. So what is the increase in performance in those that you're hiring using pre-hire assessments? And then, of course, reductions in turnover as well are another area that we can look at to really show the ROI of using these different pre-hire assessment tools. So I'll just start off with a real quick example on the efficiency piece. So what you're looking at here is a fairly typical hiring process. So if you look along the bottom of the screen, you're going to see the candidate applies through different interview types and ultimately lands on a hire. And what we have are the gray bars are going to be the applicant to hire ratios before we added a virtual job tryout with this client. So these were their numbers prior to using the virtual job tryout, the applicant to hire ratios. We worked with this client and we added a virtual job tryout. And then what we looked at in these navy bars was their applicant to hire ratios after implementing the tool. And what you can see, and really what stands out, are the significant decreases in the number of applicants it takes to get to that same hire. But really, when you think about the really administrative portions of the hiring process, the phone screen that was being conducted and the hiring manager interview that needs to be conducted, this client saw really significant decreases in the amount of applicants that it took to get to that hire. So when you think about efficiency, by adding a pre-hire assessment like this, we really enabled the client here to focus on those that are most likely to be successful in the role. And by doing that, when you talk about some of those key recruiting stats, applicant to hire ratios, speed to hire, this client was really able to show some improvements in those specific areas related to that staffing efficiency. So this is just one example, one way that we can show kind of pre-post impact of adding in a validated assessment.
That's an incredible reduction. You talk about efficiency, and everything comes down to time these days to reduce the administrative aspects of that hiring process. That's a tremendous gain. For me, I'm a big time person, and not only the human side, but that's tremendous. So good to
It is. And
and what doesn't.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Deb.
I was just going to say, we also, when you think about the time and the value of the time of the hiring manager and the time it takes to do interviews, this same client was able to compute kind of the man hours saved, if you will. And they computed that through this process, they were able to save over 40 years of man hour time just in that reduction of interviews that was going on at the hiring manager level. So huge impact. It really opens up the resources in your organization to focus on other things other than interviewing and other than hiring folks, and also spend more quality time with those that are most likely to be successful. So yeah, definitely huge impact here and a great way to show the impact at different organizations.
Yeah, and Dan, you went where I was going to go, and the company actually won a HRM Impact Award, which is a SHRM and SIOP sponsored award for taking all of those person hours in 40 plus years out of their staffing process.
So another way that we look at ROI is to then focus on the performance impact. And here's an example of job performance, again, before and after implementing a virtual job chat. And this client was using a contact center virtual job chat, and you're looking at two key metrics for the role. So hold time's a measure of efficiency, and transfer rate is a measure of effectiveness. And this client looked at those metrics really holistically across their entire population the year before and the year after they implemented the VJT. And they saw, pretty significant gains in both of these key metrics post-implementation. So really what this means and what this shows us is that those that they hired using the VJT really helped to drive these key metrics in a positive direction. So this type of finding more speaks to the increase in the quality of hires that organizations can see when you really focus on those, again, that are most likely as they go through the hiring process to be successful in this role. So just another quick example of the pre-post impact, and then how we're able to show that and show that ROI for the client. And then the last,
if I could jump in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I think that there are other dimensions that are performance related, or even extra role performance related, that are more difficult to quantify, that we know through research is another benefit of using these types of assessments. And we know that good selections, good fitting candidates are also more likely to be good company ambassadors, good corporate citizens, again, more engaging in some of those extra role behaviors, going above and beyond that we can't necessarily capture here. So there's a multitude of ways that there is a demonstrable impact, some of which are easier to demonstrate analytically than others.
Yeah, great call.
Gee, with all these benefits and results, it's almost a no-brainer to implement these types of pre-hire assessments, particularly the VJT. And that being said, anything new that we're bringing on board has to be learned. So Dana, I want to continue with you. What kind of training do recruiters need to leverage AI tools? And are there any associated costs that they need to consider?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. I think that we did have another slide on turnover. I don't know if for time we want to go past that, or want to circle back to that last slide. I think it's driving home again the same point, which is that there are a multitude of advantages of using these assessments, and it definitely impacts the bottom line. And with regard to turnover, another point that I would add, and we can demonstrate advantages with regard to the impact on turnover, but one other thing that obviously everyone is very concerned about, diversity and inclusion, and ways that we can enhance that and develop strategies that support it. One of the things we know through research is that using an assessment that ensures a good candidate fit also helps mitigate the increased risk of turnover among demographically diverse candidates. So if you're a demographically diverse candidate in an organization, you are at greater risk for turnover, but we can mitigate that risk with an assessment that ensures that there's a good fit between the candidate and the organization. But if you wanted to speak to the great example of the impact on turnover.
Yeah, I can hit on this really quickly, Dana, and then we certainly can then move along to the kind of the training piece and what's needed there. So Dana, this is one of the last examples, and Dana brings up a great point on the diversity piece as well. This particular example here is really looking at turnover reduction for two different clients. So again, kind of keeping with the theme of pre and post implementation of the VJT. And the top row of this example shows the number of terms the year prior to implementing. That middle row is the row after. And in both of these examples, there was similar hiring patterns for each of these clients in both years. But as you can see, significantly less turnover the year after the VJT was implemented. Both of these clients were able to compute kind of a rough cost per term, if you will. And these are typically pretty conservative numbers. And if pretty simple math here that I think people can follow. If you take the difference in terms and then multiply it by the cost per term, you get an annual ROI, which these numbers can get pretty high when you start to think about the cost of turnover. So even for smaller and mid-sized organizations, there's still ROI here, whether you're in the tens of thousands of dollars or the hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever the case may be. There's always going to be benefit to reducing turnover and the cost that takes. So just wanted to share that last example of a way that we're able to show ROI based on implementing a tool like the VJT.
Yeah. And that turnover reduction, I mean, that's a long-term benefit. I mean, right. The statistics show that it costs you less to have a great hire that stays in less time as opposed to a bad hire that stays for 5-10 years in that company where you can't seem to get them to perform well or have to then rehire for them. So that's really some great both financial, time, and job satisfaction results you can get from using these pre-hire assessments.
Yeah, that's a great point, and exactly right. There's definitely some interactions that happen with turnover and performance when you look at it, and so agree. It's about getting the right people in and then having the right people stay, and that's all part of the equation and all part of what we're looking to help use. Science essentially to help predict and drive that. So yeah, it's a great point.
Well, the fact that this is really still very new, you guys are thought leaders on it. You've been doing it for a decent amount of time, but it's still kind of new in the market and folks are trying to get their head wrapped around it. And like anything else, learning something new, it can be frustrating. It can cause anxiety. So but we know that the benefits are real and adoption kind of, I don't want to use the word needs to happen, but we should want to adopt. I myself am getting more technically learned because I know the benefits. So Dana, back to the training aspect. What do TAs and recruiters and staffers need to expect as far as that learning curve?
It's a great question. I think while we're discussing all of these advantages and benefits of using the pre-hire assessments, it does require an investment in including training and change management initiatives. So I guess I would put the costs in sort of three broad buckets. And really from it's more of a time investment, some of these. From a process standpoint, training recruiters and users how to navigate whatever platform that they would need to use to initiate the assessment, track completion, retrieve results, troubleshoot any problems. We integrate our assessments with Workday, so our recruiters receive training on this, how to trigger assessments, et cetera, et cetera. And that's built into the cost of the development of the assessment, but it's yet another opportunity to drive efficiency. But also understanding the kind of results that we get from this and understanding how to interpret it and where we can leverage it. So for example, and I'm not sure if we have a slide for this, but we have multiple different types of assessment reports that can be generated, whether it's just a quick score. If for a screening tool, pass, fail, that's all you need to know. You can also give candidate reports that can be used either for development and onboarding. Oh, there you go. And also an interview guide that is very helpful for hiring managers and understanding what is this person bringing to the table in terms of strengths and potential gaps, and using that information to probe appropriately in an interview to better understand the degree of fit to the role. But I think the third thing that I would mention, which is probably where I spend a lot of my time, and I foreshadowed it a bit earlier, is really spending time with recruiters and helping them gain comfort and understanding around the science behind the assessment. And I would include in that umbrella the understanding of the ROI. So to whatever extent we can share back data and statistics on demonstrating the impact and value, I think that's one element of it. But also just understanding that the process of creating this tool it's rigorous. It's guided by very stringent guidelines, and the ultimate goal is to help enhance our predictions so that we're enhancing the quality of our talent pool, so that the better they feel capable of understanding and speaking to the assessment to hiring managers or other partners in the businesses. I feel like it puts them in a better situation to be good advisors to them, and also good champions for assessments more generally in the organization. As we talked earlier, there is that change management element anytime you're introducing something new that takes a little bit of the control out of human judgment and leveraging the science and the technical tool. But I actually just received an email last night from a recruiter who was saying how confident they feel, increasingly confident in being able to speak to the advantages of a certain assessment that we leverage in early talent, and enjoy that it helps them partner better with their businesses. So I think that process, understanding and leveraging the results, and really having an opportunity to get them deeper into the science and the ROI of it would be the three buckets I would speak to.
Well, in that vein, where does the recruiter get involved in the process? Is this are these tools, these pre-hire assessment tools, customized? Does the recruiter get involved in the beginning and sort of helping with you as a partner, if it was Modern Hire, to sort of shape the questions? From
the get-go, we involve partners and stakeholders across the organization to, in our case, customize the assessment, but we would do the same whether we were using something that was more standardized, because getting buy-in is absolutely crucial, and making sure that all of the relevant perspectives are heard, which is important to ensuring that we're designing the right tool, but also ensuring that there will be seamless rollout in terms of adoption and implementation.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's a great question. Anytime, regardless of kind of the nuances of the type of assessment or the development work that goes into it, we typically will include different SMEs from our clients to make sure that their voices are represented, that they're we understand their process, we understand how this is going to be used, their fingerprints are on it. That only adds to the any effective change management program, as you can imagine. So yeah, it varies as far as kind of who's involved and how we go about that. But certainly at a high level, we want to involve our clients and really make them feel like these tools are going to integrate really seamlessly into their process, and that they have a chance to have their fingerprints on them.
And if I read it right, there's both, well, there's several. There's your competency-based questions, really job-related. There's the behavioral, as well as a situational type questions. So you're getting both performance-specific as well as the personality connection to the role, right? Is that the broad section of the question? So it kind of runs the gamut?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, each of the virtual job tryouts, kind of varies, but you're right. At a high level, there's kind of more the behavioral piece. How would people respond to different situations that they're likely to be in? So, different questions around some of those common scenarios, different simulations that are designed to really mimic that particular job, and then more the work style. How do they go about their work? That's kind of more the personality piece that is also included. And that's really one of, I think, kind of the unique aspects of the virtual job tryout, is that it is multi-method. We're not just looking at, personality. We're not just looking at cognitive ability. It's really all of these different things combined into a full experience. And then out of that, you're able to get these, kind of different competency scores that a recruiter can digest and integrate into their interview. So these are output reports that an actual recruiter would use based on the assessment results.
Got it. And I just, on the cost aspect of this, I'm assuming that's all customized based on how many tools that the recruiter is going to be using, how many folks they're going to be using it for, how many job placements they're using it for. What are the associated costs with implementing a pre-hire assessment?
Yeah, Dan, I can take that real quick. So it's the model is really twofold. So there is an initial implementation setup fee, and that's a one-time, and that will vary quite a bit depending on, are we using a straight pre-configured or how much tailoring or customization we're doing. Then there's kind of an annual license that is predicated on headcount. right? So it's a license. It's not a per candidate fee, but it's predicated on headcount in the role, and we make some assumptions as to what that looks like from a volume perspective.
Got it. You know, I'm sure recruiters and TAs, they may love this, and then they have to champion it to their senior leaders and get it in-house. So cost may be a factor, and the learning curve may be a factor. So there's some things that may sort of inhibit a recruiter or a TA to be able to get these kind of tools in. And no doubt, Fortune 500 companies are taking advantage of AI. So Dan, if you can hop back in here, what are other people analytics tools that you would recommend for a small to mid-sized firm?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it flows nicely. And I mean, when you look at those reports, one of the design considerations that we take is that we really want to make the reports as easy to interpret as possible. So there are, while there's some training that's involved, and obviously the more you use the assessments, the deeper you get as a recruiter and start to understand them. But just being able to read those reports and use the interview guides, I mean, they are designed to be very straightforward and to not have a lot of training required to kind of jump in and go. But, you know, having said that, I think even more broadly, when you think about, you know, some smaller mid-sized firms and what tools we would recommend, I mean, I think there's probably a misconception out there that you need to be a Fortune 100 or a Fortune 500 company to use people analytic tools or assessments. And, you know, in the past, I think there may have been varying degrees of truth to that. You know, building out these tools and the algorithms behind them can require really large samples, and, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to go in for them to be validated and reliable. But, you know, that said, so much work has been done over the last, you know, 20 plus years, particularly at our company, to really take the learnings and the data that we've collected and analyzed over the course of our company's history, millions, if not billions of data points. And we've created these pre-configured assessments that can really be beneficial for small and mid-sized firms and easy to implement. And so we'll talk shortly about kind of the approach that we take with any tool that we develop and how we ensure it's fair and that it's going to provide utility for an organization. But really, with the advances in the way that we're able to analyze large amounts of data and various data points, I think it's created a great opportunity for smaller firms to benefit from a lot of the work and the research that historically was only really able to be used by organizations that have the resources to conduct those types of studies. So I think that's, you know, we're coming to a time now where these tools don't just need to be used by huge organizations. And I think one other benefit that comes to mind when you think about using, you know, particularly pre-hire, pre-configured assessments, I should say, at smaller mid-sized firms, is that you can connect them to different areas of your talent management programs. And so when you think about onboarding and development and training and performance management, those are important, you know, programs regardless of the size of your organization. And when you start with a validated assessment and you have some of these key competencies that have already been established for different types of roles, you then have a starting point to further develop other parts of your talent management program. And you can start to connect the dots with those key competencies into training, performance management, et cetera. And we've seen smaller and mid-sized organizations do that, where they're able to really integrate initially a pre-hire assessment and then integrate that into their broader talent strategy. So it really serves as a nice kind of starting spot for those companies that are looking to develop those parts of their HR function.
So are you referencing, though, an additional type of tool outside of the VJT, or modifying VJT to serve the small mid-sized firms, or there is additional tools that Modern Hire and the market offers?
Yeah, so really when you think about, like Scott had referenced, the kind of the initial, the available blueprints and the pre-configured solutions. So these are again, some of those, what some of those common job families look like. And each one of these is a pre-configured assessment that includes, you know, 5 to 6 core competencies that we know are important for success for these different roles. And so now, as a mid small size organization, if you implement a labor or virtual job tryout, you now have an established 5 or 6 competencies that you know can be connected to other parts of your performance management platform. It's not something that we do at Modern Hire necessarily, but as you think about training and other training tools you may use or performance management, you have a baseline for what the key competencies that you will need to ultimately develop in these individuals to be successful. So nothing that we do, but more thinking broadly about kind of your own talent management strategy at your organization.
Yeah, and Lisa, just to jump in on that real quick. So I think, the answer to your question was yes, it's using kind of, pre-configured, pre-established, kind of stand on the shoulders of the giants who went before you, so to speak, to implement assessments for what might be smaller mid-market. But there's also the opportunity to think about assessment more broadly than what we've talked about VJT, and think about the Modern Hire platform and using interview tech and some of the on-demand interviewing as another way to better assess and ascertain talent. So it could be a combination of any of those things.
Great. Well, I tell you, we've covered a lot of ground here, and Dan, I think you sort of intimated to this, and I want to round out our discussion with a particularly timely question. And Scott, I'll throw it to you. Is there potential discrimination when using AI? How can it be monitored effectively?
Yeah, it's a great question and a really important one, and one everybody should be asking. I mean, AI is so powerful and it's not going away, right? There's lots of examples of AI in our everyday lives, from retailers using recommended engines, search engines to make recommendations on purchases based on your browsing history, to self-driving cars, right? So when we think about AI when it comes to hiring, it absolutely is equally as powerful and can be used to predict the likelihood of success on a job, as well as the risk of turnover. And in many ways, it's superior to other statistical techniques that we've historically used. But the key is it really has to be informed and directed by human experts to be most effective. And I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But when used correctly, AI really does offer tremendous benefits, but there is potential for discrimination when using AI. So, how we get our arms around that and think about the efficacy of it and how to monitor it, it really comes down to adhering to a number of ethical standards as it relates to AI. And I'll walk through those pretty quickly. At a high level, when we think about ethical AI and how do we know that we aren't creating discrimination, there's really 3 things that we center around. One, can we demonstrate benefits to the organization and to the individuals? Is it transparent in our process, and can we verify and reproduce results? And I'll dig deeper into those in just a second. But before we do, the image on the screen is a good one, because it illustrates how difficult it can be for a computer to interpret human emotions, right? So back to this ethical AI and how do we know we're not discriminating? If you look at these 2 images, they show very similar features, but it's obvious to us as human beings, one is laughing and one is crying. It's probably hard to see, but if you look at those AU9, AU25, those are facial action units, and both AU9, nose wrinkle, AU26, jaw drop, AU25, lips apart. So the computer, the AI, would likely predict the same emotional outcome based on the data, based on these inputs. But again, we can see President Obama's laughing while LeBron James is crying. So we have to be really careful about how we apply AI techniques. And that's really kind of the notion behind these AI ethical standards that, Dan, if you want to fast forward, I'll dig a little bit deeper. So in the context of hiring, this first ethical standard is that AI has to be beneficial to the organization and to the candidate. And the word candidate is key. Like AI that maximize outcomes for for groups or organizations, which they do, there's tremendous ROI, can't lose sight of the impact on the person. And one of the ways we look at that or monitor it to say, is the AI beneficial to both organizations and candidates, is by looking at bias control. And we certainly don't have enough time today to talk about all the layers of bias in the world, but when it comes to hiring, the study of bias and adverse impact really dates back to 1964, Civil Rights Act, which prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, and since then there's been other categories added. But this is really where AI can help us a lot, because if we can track the demographic group that a person belongs to, then we can make sure that we aren't scoring that group on average lower or higher than other groups. And if we find that, we can adjust the AI scoring algorithm and use it to alert us to when things are kind of out of sync, if you will. So that's a really important point where people get a little anxious over AI and is a computer making a decision for me. And the other really important point here when it comes to reducing bias is you have to start with good data and layer on these advanced analytic techniques. Otherwise, you get garbage in, garbage out, right? If you apply data science and AI techniques to data that might not be relevant for the job. So I'm talking about if we're looking at resumes, which everybody's resume is different, and what's on my resume may be a function of how much help I had in writing it, or looking at job applications or data that might be scraped from social sites. Those things could be problematic regardless of how good the AI techniques are if we don't start with good job relevant data to say, let's build the AI, the scoring algorithm around it. I'll just keep going for the sake of time. If you want to go back real quick, Dan, sorry. So the other two things in terms of beneficial for organizations and candidates, superior job match, we talked a lot about matching people to jobs, and AI is really able to do that. And the graphs on the right are really small and hard to see, but the key takeaway is what we've done is looked at data sets that we've had for years and years pre-AI, and then have applied AI to these existing data sets. And lo and behold, we see lift. The AI is better able to predict and increase accuracy than other statistical techniques that existed and still exist, but have been kind of subsumed, if you will, by AI. And lastly, it's about improving the candidate experience, right? We talked a little bit about the candidate experience. So if you look at the very bottom of the screen, the more traditional, multiple choice or click the radio button as an experience as a candidate versus where we're migrating away from that traditional assessment to really using AI to have people speak into a computer to answer a question, to solve a problem, and the computer can do a better job of making sense of what the person is saying. So those are ways that AI is beneficial to companies and to candidates. And the other two kind of broad buckets of this ethical AI is transparency, right? So we at Modern Hire very much adhere to this notion of a glass box. If you think about what goes into the AI and the algorithm, it could be really difficult to decipher, and we really can't truly observe how or why the AI produced the result that it did. And that's kind of the black box analogy. The computer's analyzing a bunch of data, making a recommendation. We don't necessarily know how or why because we don't have visibility into the inner workings. We take a glass box approach. So in other words, we need to make sure that whatever substantive personal characteristics that drive employment decisions, that is what is driving it. And there's awareness of what and how those factors are being weighted into the decision. You want to forward one more slide, Dan? In the last piece, and I promise I'll hit this in just a minute, and then we'll leave the last couple of minutes for questions, is this notion of being verifiable and reproducible and publishable. This is another part of our ethical AI. So even though you've been hearing about AI for a long time, and you may have somebody named Alexa sitting right next to you in the field of selection science, AI is still in its early stages. And we feel very strongly that we need to share findings with the academic community to demonstrate the results are real, and to get away from just the marketing hype, which there's so much of. Last October, when we were actually able to attend conferences in person, I was at HR Tech, and you couldn't walk more than a few feet without stumbling across a vendor making really bold AI claims. And on the surface, they sound really, really impressive. But back to your initial question, Lisa, it's vital that people ask the right questions and seek to understand what's behind these statements, what data was collected, how was it analyzed, how useful is it really in the prediction of these key outcomes. So this last ethical AI principle is really researchers should really seek to share and publish their findings, because we're collectively contributing to the broader scientific knowledge base that will help advance the field. So sorry, that was a ramble, a lot in a very short
Not at all.
Let me stop and see what if any questions there are.
Well, no, I appreciate that. I mean, there is heavy science behind that, and this is all of us having to learn about it in our own way as it relates to our own space. So it's a great sort of transition here as we come to the close. I just want to give 15 seconds of silence for everyone to kind of just digest what you heard, think about how it might relate to your world, and throw out a question, either in a chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask it before I ask my final question.
I have a question. Just curious, if from what you've seen from the trends with clients, are there certain job functions that
Mike, your audio video paused for a moment, so if you want to repeat. Oh, what a shame technology has to impede.
have had better results than others?
Well, I think we got a sense, Mike. We didn't hear your whole question, but I think we got a sense of it. Are there job functions that have better results using these assessments? Is that right?
Yeah, let's assume that was the question. I mean, the short answer is yes, and it comes down to really two things. What is it that we are measuring with the assessment, and what are the outcomes we're trying to predict? So certain things are easier to measure in an assessment, and others are fuzzier and a little bit more ambiguous. So that has an impact. And then it's to the extent, again, back to my garbage in, garbage out, to the extent that we have good data to marry the assessment to, then we're better able to predict. So a lot of roles where objective measures of performance exist, it's oftentimes easier to show the ROI and the business impact. So, sales roles, or roles where there's objective metrics of performance versus just the subjective. And we look at both, because certain roles, you look at a manager or a leader role, there's not always clear-cut metrics. So it's competency-based versus metric-based.
Great. Well, wow, this has really been eye-opening. I want to respect everyone's time, and I really want to thank our amazing panelists, Dana, Scott, Dan, for your time, your energy, and insights. I've certainly walked away with a chock full of info that I want to pass on. I want to just let everyone know, if you have further questions after today, I encourage you to reach out to our panelists. So share with them, reach out, get a question asked that way beyond today, because I know it kind of takes time to digest all this. And I want to thank you, our audience, for joining in, for your time, your participation. The recording will go out next week, so keep an eye out for it. And do stay tuned in for future programs. So as a heads up, SMA is hosting a virtual event on unconscious bias in recruiting on November 4th with Torrin Ellis, an expert on the subject, and a holiday networking on December 9th. And in between, SMA shares great content. So like us on Facebook, message us on LinkedIn, join us on our website. Keep up the great recruiting, the great work that you're
Lisa, Mike.
Stay healthy.
Yeah, Lisa, Mike, thanks so much for having us. Really appreciate it.
That was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks guys. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thanks, Phil.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.